Hello, aspirants. Welcome back to Believers IAS Academy. And in this today's playlist of the high yield topics coverage, especially from polity, the sixth lecture is with respect to fundamental rights, one of the most important chapters in the entire Lakshmikant, which has a very good hit ratio of majority number of questions which has come over the last many years now. So we have summarized the entire chapter within the 50 must-know questions. Of course, we will just try and solve 10 questions, and we will make probably one, two, or three different parts of videos to cover this fundamental rights. Stay tuned. Please do not miss watching this very important video, and let's begin. So I hope you know the drill. We will first read out the 10 questions, give some time to think, and then probably we'll start answering the questions in the later part of the video. So the first question: is it correct to describe Part 3 of the Constitution as the Magna Carta of India? Do fundamental rights act as limitations on the executive, tyranny, and arbitrary legislative action? Are most fundamental rights enforceable mainly against the state? Question number 4: which fundamental rights remain enforceable during a national emergency? Fifth question: what is the meaning of state under Article 12? Does Article 13 declare that constitutional amendments are not law? Seventh question: explain equality before law, equal protection of laws, and rule of law. And the eighth question: is the Indian Constitution the result of judicially enforced individual rights? Ninth question: what are the exceptions to equality before law? And the last question for the day: how does the word only affect Article 15? Is it enforceable against private individuals as well? Well, you can pretty much pause the video, go back to the questions, and then think, memorize for the answer. Well, anyhow, we will start with the explanation. First question: is it correct to describe the Part 3 of the Constitution as the Magna Carta of India? The answer is yes, because Part 3 is called the Magna Carta of India because it guarantees the most important thing, which is the fundamental rights to individuals, and places the constitutional limits on the powers of the state, like pretty much how it exactly happened with respect to Magna Carta in the year 1215 in England, and it protects citizens from arbitrary executive and legislative action. So hence it is considered to be the Magna Carta of India, and we are Ambedkar rightfully regarded these rights as essential for democracy, right? So in the previous video I've also stressed about the importance of knowing all the parts of the Indian Constitution. Very important, you have to by heart it. And anyway, moving to the second question: do fundamental rights act as limitations on executive tyranny and arbitrary legislative action? The answer is yes, true. It acts as limitations, especially on the executive tyranny and also the arbitrary legislative action, and it performs these both dual functions. And also, any law or executive action which is violating fundamental right of a citizen in any way can be declared unconstitutional by courts as well. And this is also pretty much covered under Article 13, because any law inconsistent with the fundamental rights can be considered null and void, as what the Article 13 also says. And this ensures rule of law. What is rule of law? Rule of law is nothing but supremacy of laws, not the supremacy of humans or the supremacy of the government, but the supremacy of laws. And the constitutional supremacy means the constitution is supreme, the constitution is more powerful, right? So yes, of course, fundamental rights does put limitations on the executive tyranny, and not just the executive tyranny but also the arbitrary legislative actions. Means simply that arbitrary, the legislative does not have the power to legislate at their whims and fancies. Okay. Next question: are most fundamental rights enforceable mainly against the state? Means, is the fundamental rights only against the state actions? The answer is yes, true. It is not only. Yeah, I mean, I have to correct my statement. Are most of the word, are fundamental rights enforceable mainly against the state? Then that statement is wrong, because fundamental rights does not only talk about the overreach of the state. But most of the fundamental rights, however, they talk about or they put restrictions or they enforce or they are enforceable mainly against the state action. Most of the fundamental rights, okay, because the fundamental rights itself, if you see one of the feature, right, it is mostly enforceable against the state and is defined under the article 12, as in it puts the limitations on the state, and what is state is clearly given in article 12, and the primary objective of this is to prevent misuse of public power. And talking of why the fundamental rights are not only enforceable against the state is not the correct option, because there are few fundamental rights which are also enforceable against private individuals also. For example, Article 17 and Article 23. So, Article 17 is the right against untouchability, and then you have Article 23, which talks about human exploitation, right? Human exploitation and further things, right? So, hence the Begar part and all those things. I hope you remember Begar is the key word there in Article 23. So, of course, it talks about the fundamental rights, puts restrictions both on the state and also the private individuals, but mostly the restrictions is on the state as the right statement. Fourth one, which fundamental rights remain enforceable during a national emergency? Very important. Article 20 and 21 is that particular or those two articles which can never be suspended even during a national emergency. And another important point to remember, that this was told or this was reiterated, this was underscored under or in the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act, and this is also one of the very important thing we have to keep in mind. Fifth question, what is the meaning of state under Article 12? So now everything in fundamental rights, it talks about controlling the state's action, controlling the state's power to univocally, control the individuals or empower the, or let's say to let's say encash the individuals. So it puts a complete break, a speed breaker on the state action. So Article 12 defines or tells what all constitute under state. So if you have to see, there are a few important things which you have to keep in mind. There was a question and there can also be a question, very important. Article 12 gives an inclusive definition, very important, of the state to widen the scope of fundamental rights. Means it has definitely put restrictions on the state, and doesn't mean state is clearly defined and only 5-6 of things are mentioned as what constitutes state, right? So that will not be that inclusive. So hence, in order to cover, subsume that the fundamental rights and the punishments or the restrictions as to what a state should not do should applicable or should be applicable to a larger, wider area, the definition of state under Article 12 has been made inclusive. And what all is covered? The union and state governments, parliament and state legislatures, local authorities, and even the other authorities like statutory bodies, PSUs, bodies performing public functions. And to an extent, judiciary is also included, but only when enforcing the rights, not when performing judicial functions. However, these many intricate details are not required. Generally, if UPSC asks if judiciary is involved, the answer is yes, it should be yes, okay, unless they particularly talk about any judgments or let's say any judicial functions, then there is an exception, right? But of course, these, I don't think UPSC will go this much beyond trying to ask a tricky question. But if judiciary is there in the statement, it is correct, unless it is talking about any judgments, because judgments cannot be because see, ultimately the power of Supreme Court is to make sure that it enforces or it tries to enact or tries to checks keep the legislation in checks and balances, so that it makes sure that the legislature is not doing anything that is abrogating someone's fundamental right. So it is generally understood that Supreme Court will ensure to maintain the fundamental rights, right? So that one purview is not included, but however, let's not complicate the discussion. If judiciary is in the statement, most likely it will be correct, except the fact where it comes or it is asked if judiciary is performing any judicial actions, like probably giving judicial judgments and all those things. Anyway, those things not at all important, not to be confused so much. If judiciary is there, you can just go for it, right? Next question, does Article 13 declare that constitutional amendments are not law? Very important. The answer is true. We already discussed what Article 13 is, and also Article 13 clearly states that any constitutional amendments which are made, is not considered as a law. We'll read it. And this was done, or this was given under the famous Keshwananda Bharati case 1973, which says constitutional amendments are not considered law under Article 13 and hence cannot be challenged for violating fundamental rights. However, they cannot violate the basic structure of the Constitution. And also there is other important aspect of Article 13 as well. Two important doctrines of eclipse, doctrine of severability. So this is also very, very important to know what it is. So please make sure go check what these two doctrines are, which are also part of your Article 13. That is also important. Next is next question. Explain equality before law, equal protection of laws, and the rule of law. Well, equality before law, simple. It is the absence of any special privileges given to any particular community or any particular or group. Then it is also talking about the equal subjection of all persons to the same ordinary law. However, on the other hand, equal protection of laws talks about equal treatment of equals and reasonable classification as and when required. Then lastly, the rule of law. It is famously coined by A.V. Dicey, very important, and it is mostly talking about supremacy of law, equality before law, and also the predominance of the legal spirit in a country, which is the Constitution being the supreme. And next question, is the Indian Constitution the result of judicially enforced individual rights? Something very philosophical, very important to understand this dimension. However, the answer is false. Is the Indian Constitution the result of judicially enforced individual rights? Absolutely not, because this is pretty much existing in the British system, where the laws are, or let's say the Constitution is evolving every day, or let's say it is pretty much so flexible that whatever happens or whatever verdict is given on a particular issue, that becomes a new law and is being added as a part of the Constitution, right? And talking about the Constitution, we have studied or we have even understood different types of Constitution. There is a written Constitution, unwritten Constitution, right? So pretty much Britain also have a very flexible Constitution, right? Amendments are not that hectic as how it is in US, and also it's pretty much like unwritten Constitution, right? So the result of whatever happens judicially, right, is enforced as individual rights there. So whatever happens on a daily basis, time to time basis, case by case basis, is getting added. But however, unlike the British system, the Indian Constitution is not a result of judicial evolution of rights. However, rights are expressly defined in the Constitution and enforced by courts, right? Means already we have rights, we have clearly defined what rights are, because ours is the written Constitution, the only written Constitution which is so big, right? India's Constitution. And it has already defined each and every rights as to what exactly this right means and what exactly this right doesn't mean. And however, the judicial enforcements are later added as amendments, or let's say probably like an add-on to the already existing law. So the statement is wrong. Okay, I hope you understood. Next question, what are the exceptions to equality before law? Very, very important. Speaking of fundamentals as a chapter, it is very important to know all the exceptions of all the important articles, of which one of this is Article 15, which is equality before law. However, there are five different articles. Four different exceptions: immunity to president, governor, which is given under Article 361, where at their personal capacity, even they cannot be given any judicial proceedings, no criminal proceedings against them, right? No arrest can be made for the president or the governor. Then the diplomatic immunity given to the foreign envoys who come to India. Then judicial immunity for judges, parliamentary privileges given to MLAs and MP, right? So these exceptions, they go absolutely against the equality before law, but these are all the exceptions given to the supreme, or let's say the very special personalities of the country. Next one, how does the word only affect Article 15, and is it enforceable against private individuals? The word only means discrimination is prohibited exclusively on specified grounds, which is religion, race, caste, sex, and place of birth. So what is Article 15? Article 15 talks about the prohibition of discrimination of people only on the basis of religion, race, caste, sex, and place of birth, in terms of using the public places. right? So the word only means that discrimination is prohibited exclusively on these specified grounds. That nobody, no citizen can be discriminated based on the fact that he is belonging to some particular religion, or is belonging to a particular race, or is a part of a particular caste, or is a part of a particular, or say is he a woman, or is the person a male, right? Or the place of birth cannot be discriminated, especially in public places. And also it is even more important to know few of the important clauses, like article 15 subclause 2 says is enforceable against private individuals in matters of access to public places also, right? However, to it is not extended completely to all the private places, but it is enforceable against private individuals in matters of access to public places. So that is also one of the niche you have to keep in mind. Anyway, wherever there are words like only, especially in the chapter fundamental rights, it is very important you pay attention, right? Anyway, let's not make this video even more lengthy. I hope 10 questions sufficient for one particular video. Stay tuned, we'll come with the part 2 of the same video lecture series. Until then, signing off, this is Madan Gopal. Let's meet in another video. Thank you.